Thanks, Patricia, for that introduction and also for letting folks know that there'll just be two of us presenting today. Let me start by thanking you all for joining me in a conversation about a project that we're working on, something we call Arches Lingo, which is an application designed to manage what we call authority data, which would include information like the SORI, as well as other authority data sets. Can I have the next slide, please? Just a quick bit of background so that you know who I am and where I'm coming from. My name's Dennis Wuthrich, and I'm the CEO of Farallon Geographics. We are a software development company based in San Francisco, and we've been working on the Arches platform for, at least 12 years now. And we're very much focused on the moment working on Arches Lingo, which is an application that the Getty Conservation Institute is leading to create software to manage the creation of control vocabularies, the SORI, and we'll talk about that in some detail. Can I have the next slide, please? So we've broken out the conversation into sort of three main categories. The first is really a discussion of how we're going to build the software and why we've made some of the technical decisions that we've made. Then you'll get a chance to see a little bit about some of the details on how we expect to manage the creation and management of authority data. This comes really directly from our work in engaging with knowledge organization specialists, and I think you'll likely see a bit of detail there. And then finally, we'll talk about how we actually want to model the details of control vocabularies and related authority data. So the next slide, please. So for the next 10 or so minutes, I'll be talking to you about how we're actually going to build the software and what some of our constraints are and what some of our goals are. Phil Carlisle, who is ill today, won't be able to join us, but you'll see his slides. And I'll just invite any of you who have questions about what Phil is going to talk about to contact myself and he independently. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And then we'll end with George Bruseker talking about some of the key details about how we want to model information in Arches. Can I have the next slide, please? So I don't want to take it for granted that we all know what Arches is. So I want to spend a moment just giving you a quick overview of what the Arches platform actually is. And it's a software platform that provides some key capabilities for managing information, so modeling and managing information, for creating and updating information, for searching and visualizing information, and ultimately provides a way of implementing workflows for interacting with the information. So I don't expect you to read all the details of the slide. Really, I just show this here to give you an impression of really just what the suite of capabilities of Arches actually include. Can I have the next slide, please? So really, I think the key takeaway that I'd like you to come away with from Arches as a platform is that it's built to let us build applications, and applications that are designed for a very specific set of stakeholders, a very specific set of user communities, and the platform provides us with all the tools we need to model data, to find and interact with information, to visualize it. Ultimately, the key takeaway here is Arches is a way for us to quickly build applications and allow for data integration, ultimately so that we can make informed decisions about how to manage our resources and be better stewards for our resources. And I wanted to just show you at least a couple examples of what we've done with arches. So this is a screenshot of something called Arches for HERs. It's a project that we worked on with Historic England to manage their inventory of cultural heritage resources. And it includes the ability to manage, capture and manage information about physical things, activities, digital objects, textual objects, the people and organizations that are that work with these resources. It's quite comprehensive in its ability to manage all the information about that you might want for managing an inventory of cultural resources. Next slide, please. We've also developed an application called Arches for Science, and this is an application that's meant very much to support conservation scientists in their work as they analyze and interpret works of art. It's designed to manage the digital data that are created when a conservation scientist does analysis on an object, as well as their interpretations and their results and their documentation. And we're actually working on this at the moment, and we'll be extending this to include the ability to manage reference collection objects. This is another project that's being driven by the Getty Conservation Institute. Next slide, please. So with that very whirlwind summary of what Arches is, let's get to the meat here, which is building software to manage authority data. So building software to manage knowledge organization systems. And the eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed when I showed this slide a moment ago, there's this little portion where we actually do care about managing control vocabularies. And Arches, in fact, already comes with a module that allows you to manage thesauri. So polyhierarchical, concept-based thesauri, multilingual. Arches already has this capability. Next slide, please. So kind of fair to ask, well, why Arches? And why Arches ought to be the basis for creating a new application to manage authority data. And it really kind of comes down to a couple key points. One is that we recognize that we need to improve the current capabilities of Arches thesaurus management module. And I'll air our dirty laundry a little bit and tell you kind of what some of the issues are. So next slide, please. We have a module for managing control vocabularies in Arches because they're a key component of building interoperable and fair data. And in Arches, we use these control vocabularies, we use these concept-based thesauri in two kind of key ways. One is to help with consistent data management. And so, like any software system, when you get to a data entry form, there are times when you are constrained to select a specific value. These drop-down lists contain values. These values come directly from Arch's internal thesaurus and can be managed locally. Next slide, please. We also take advantage of the thesauri in Arches to support search and discovery, and in particular to help with providing search results even if somebody doesn't exactly know what the right value to search on is. So the example here is by taking advantage of alternate labels for a concept, or sort of non-preferred labels, or labels and non-preferred labels in multiple languages, Arches can provide search results using these additional terms, even though the data are indexed with the preferred term of the language that's being used to manage the data. Next slide, please. And here's where we're going to look at the Arch's internal reference data manager in some detail. And really, the key point here is, as Arches currently stands, you actually have to be both a knowledge organization expert. That is to say, you're required to create, design, in effect, your concept thesauri, so your facets, your hierarchies, all this stuff basically is a first step in deploying an Arches application. Next slide, please. And then once you've done all that hard work, then we ask you to select the appropriate concepts from within your thesaurus and map them to the appropriate dropdowns in the Arches data editing forms. And that's a fair amount of work. And if I could have the next slide, please. It really kind of hints at one of the key problems we want to address here, which is actually kind of decoupling this requirement of having to be both a knowledge organization expert as well as a domain expert in a particular discipline so that you can use Arches. Right now, we expect you to be able to do both of these things, to build multi-hierarchical controlled vocabularies, and then to know how to use them for a particular discipline. And we really want to decouple those two things. We want to make software that's much, much better at supporting people who have to design and build and maintain vocabularies. And then we want to make it easier for people who have to use those vocabularies to implement them in an application. If I could have the next slide, please. So again, why Arches? And I think the answer here is, I think, quite straightforward. Arches is designed to manage quite sophisticated and complex cultural heritage data, and terminology is really no different than any other kind of cultural heritage data. The talks we've been listening to over the past couple days, I think, really make this clear. We start looking at the sophistication and complexity of terminology data. It's clear that we need tools that can handle the subtleties and the key representations necessary to manage terminology data properly. And Arches provides tools to let us do that. This is a screenshot of Arches, what we call the Arches designer. And I show it here really to prompt me to highlight a couple things. The first is Arches provides really quite capable data modeling tools that support semantic models. So one of the things you can do with Arches is to build models that rely on ontologies such as the CDEP CRM or others to build models that are fundamentally semantic, where you can use the ontologies to define what you mean by the various attributes in your model. And once those models have been built, Arches will automatically inspect the models and build data entry forms for you. And you can use the designer to define the data access privileges, the permissions that your user community will have in being able to access, view, create, and update data. If I could have the next slide, please. So really, the modeler is the basis for why I think Arches is an appropriate framework to build Arches Lingo on, an application for managing and control vocabularies. Its ability to quickly build models that include semantics, its ability to then inspect those models to provide all of the key data management services you need. So being able to create new data, update existing data, review and edit data, or even delete data. These services come part and parcel with Arches, as well as search and retrieval, data research and retrieval services, and quite a robust API. It's built, basically the message here is Arches is built to manage sophisticated data at scale. Next slide, please. And of course, the other reason we're very, very interested in building a improved way of managing authority data is because ultimately our goal with Arches is to build data sets that are interoperable. And so these FAIR principles for data are really kind of a key part of what we strive for in Arches. And ultimately, if you want to build data that are reusable and interoperable, you really have to do, I think, quite a good job of thinking about how to take advantage of authoritative vocabularies. Next slide, please. Now, this slide's a bit inelegantly worded here. What we've done is we've looked at what the options are for supporting the requirements that we've identified in working with knowledge organization experts for what constitute acceptable tools. And we haven't found any. So we haven't found any open source tools yet that meet the use cases and the data management requirements that we've identified based on our work with people like Historic England and the Getty Vocabulary group. The applications we think are necessary just don't exist yet. So we're going to build them. And we're going to build them as an Arches application that we call Lingo, which will be coming available next summer. And it will be an application designed to manage authority data. If I have the next slide, please. And you've heard me use the term authority data several times, and maybe it's time to actually define what I mean by authority data. If I could have the next slide, please. We've defined authority data that Lingo is designed to manage as primarily thesauri. So that means managing schemes that contain concepts that have hierarchical structure with labels and scope notes and all the things that you would imagine you need to manage thesauri properly. We've also architected Lingo to be capable for managing places, people, and organizations and periods as well. Although really right now our focus and what we have in front of us is going to be limited to thesauri. We are certainly looking into the future and positioning ourselves so that we can manage places and people and periods as well. Next slide, please. Arches references will be a thing that goes into the Arches application specifically to help people take advantage of existing authority data so that they can build FAIR databases. Next slide, please. So you heard me say a moment ago that we want to build Arches to disassociate the need to be both a knowledge organization expert and a domain expert. So Arches Lingo will be a tool for knowledge organization specialists. Arches references will be how Arches takes advantage of authority data, whether it's managed in Lingo or other applications.
There we go. Good morning, afternoon, evening, and very late night to everyone. It's a pleasure to join you even from afar to talk on the Arches Lingo project and to participate, if at a distance, in this conference. Thank you, Dennis, for laying the groundwork. And normally Phil is the more engaging and entertaining of our trio. So I'll try to live up to his standards or not. My name is George Bruseker, and I am playing in this project one of my favorite roles, which is being the semantic architect. So the person working behind the scenes to try to develop the most expressive data model that's going to support doing the work that knowledge organization specialists want to do in their capacity of building stable, fair structures for documenting and categorizing information. Could I have the next slide, please? So I think the task of creating the data models for Lingo is absolutely foundational. Using an open source software with a rich and robust framework that is Arches is obviously key. And then from there, you need to build a foundation of a rigorously defined, documented, and richly expressive data model so that you enable the possibility of doing knowledge organization work according to standards and in a way that will allow the information to be reused in the multiple applications that it's developed for. Could I get the next slide, please? And in that, Arch is an interesting application because it is designed on purpose to be born as a tabula rasa. It doesn't impose a data structure on you. It is a semantic data management platform, so you must build a semantic data structure for it, and that immediately causes you to make some decisions about how you want to represent the data that you are going to be managing. So have the next slide, please. So in this work, what that's really challenged us to do is to create a well-documented and reusable data model. It is a condition sine qua non that it meet the standards of knowledge organization, including as a very basic foundation, ISO 25964. It should, whatever new things we develop, need to obviously maintain backward compatibility to well-known models, but we also want to bring into play best practice in semantics and knowledge organization in 2024, and to align with broader strategies in semantic data management and heritage in the contemporary situation. Next slide, please. So the world that we need to be able to support the accurate documentation of includes, at the minimum, vocabularies. So the vocabularies themselves, the thesauri that people are generating, the concepts therein, and this is often the behind the scenes stuff, but it's obviously front of mind for knowledge organization specialists, provenance in history and contributions. And so we need to develop a data model that's expressive for all those things, and which creates the affordances to produce vocabularies and thesauri, to consume them and use them in applications, and to support the life cycle of those vocabularies. Next slide, please. So that's a big challenge, without a doubt. And in that process, then we had a number of meetings and conversations and consultations to figure out how we were going to go. And there are, of course, different data models available, and there are well-known representations. And so it is possible in Arches to turn off semantics and just build a whatever data model. That was never really a question, but SCOS is a main format of interchange in the world of vocabularies. And so that was something we definitely had to consider. We also were, generally speaking, just to note that in doing conceptual modeling semantics, reuse and following good practice and not developing for the sake of developing is very important. So we're always looking towards what can we just adopt. So we haven't built anything new for the sake of building something new. So we looked at SCOS, we looked at linked art, and we looked at some extensions of linked art. So linked art, parenthesis, being a group, a collection, a movement of organizations who are trying to adopt CDOC CRM as a CDOC CRM standard, or as a semantic standard, but in a way that is well defined so that everybody finally has integrated data. So we considered that as well, and we considered extending that. And we tried to bring all of that together to try to meet all the different audiences. So if we could go forward, please. And I want to make, I have 15 minutes, so I'm not going to explain all the data model to you, but I just want to explain to you the thinking behind it, etc. And I think it's important to call out in this next section the conversation, the collaboration we had with the Getty Vocabulary Project, who's a host of this conference. So if we go to the next slide. This was an incredibly important conversation, one of the many that were had in working over this data model. But because of the wide extent of adoption of AAT, TGN, and the other authorities that are developed by GVP, it was very important to be able to handle not only smaller size vocabulary projects and middle-sized projects, but very large ones adopted widely. So we started a conversation with them. Next slide, please. And this is really interesting to think about, like, all of the commitments and engagements that developing a vocabulary that is then out there in the world and isn't just an artifact sitting in your system, but is being widely used by AI processes and human processes, etc. So looking at the need to push information out into different formats, meeting different needs for different communities was very important. Next slide, please. And also, calling back to the previous slide, working on contribution and thinking about that data lifecycle. So that was an important conversation that sort of pushed the boundaries of all the things that we needed to represent in their full richness, and then narrowed down to different application uses. So out of that conversation, really on the data modeling side, the interesting things that came out are that, when you apply an ontology, or when you apply or use a term, you just sort of grab the top of the iceberg of a piece of information which has actually been developed and processed and contributed to by multiple organizations that are documenting the history of a term, the change of its meaning, and that could be at the level of the linguistic assignation to the concept, or the organization of the concept into hierarchies over time, and also the horizontal relationships between concepts. So there's a heavy burden of documentation there, plus the documentation of on what ground scientifically, historically, do we stand to say these things, the provenance data, the witness information. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So out of those conversations, we arrived at some solutions. If we could go to the next slide, please. What we ultimately arrived at was that we needed more expressivity than the straight SCOS model, which is a serialization of vocabularies that is commonly used, can give. More expressivity than linked art, which is a principled application of CDOC CRM, could apply. But at the same time, we wanted to be able to talk to those audiences as well. And so what we did is we called upon an extension to CDOC CRM called CRM AAA, Art and Architectural Argumentation, a call out to the famous AAT in a certain way. And that extension basically is an effort to add some expressivity to the CDOC CRM ISO standard, which is a rich semantic standard for documenting cultural heritage and historical data, but has a strong event-oriented and physical reality-oriented modeling strategy. And it extends that and adds on the ability to talk about social facts which in fact one finds really wrestling with the kinds of data that are managed in a rich thesaurus documentation, vocabulary documentation program is necessary and is there. So I have called out three major aspects that called for richer modeling that is typically available. So appellative status, which is what a thing is called, hierarchical status, how it's categorized, and associative status, how it's related to other concepts. And if you're not aficionados of CDOC CRM, in that ontology, those are represented normally as sort of binary properties. And you say this concept has a name, this concept is hierarchically smaller or broader or narrower than this thing. And the problem with that is a sort of atemporal definition, subeternis, I don't know, but my Latin is bad, eternally true. And these are not the case. What we want to know is the historical evolution of the meaning of terms, the meaning of concepts. And so I will call out the modeling of one concept and how we need to call upon the idea of a social fact to represent a node around how we name things and how that changes over time, and how we've added that into the basic CDOC CRM modeling so that we can express this richness, and then finally how we merge that back to the needs of different user communities. So if I could get to the next slide, please. So if we consider a term in the AT, Lambruscatura, also wainscoting in English, we see that it has a name, Lambruscatura. We have interesting historical information that it was used from some time to now, that it's still a term in use, that it's in Italian, and it was attributed by a certain institution. We can go to the next slide, please. And I'm going to basically, walk you very quickly through the decision process of why we had to go to a richer model so we could go back to a simpler model. So using basic SCOS, obviously we couldn't just take that ontology, which Arches allows us to do. We just put SCOS in Arches and represent everything directly in SCOS. But all that would give us was that the concept wainscoting has an alt label, Lambruscatura. So we would have lost a lot of information and cut off a good bit of research. So very good. Then if we move on to patterns suggested to us by the linked art standard of applying CDOC CRM, it gives us a lot more expressivity than that. It allows us to talk about the concept itself. That's on the left, the E55 type, which we can also declare a SCOS concept. And then we can talk about the label applied as linguistic appellation. And then we can qualify the language in which it is derived. And we can also move on to starting to talk about witness, the witness for this term. I realize that I only have 20 seconds left technically, but Phil wasn't here, so I think I have 5 more minutes, and I'll do it. I don't have much more to go. So this is already a step ahead, but what we're missing is the temporal historical information. So if we go on to the next slide. What we do in using what I've called linked art plus, using this CRM AAA ontology, which I didn't mention, by the way, is supported within the structure of the Swiss Art Research Infrastructure, which is supporting development of these more specialized ontologies for documenting historical information, is that we see in the middle here a node called appellative status. And it's really like a key conceptual point for really talking about the social fact of how a name or a hierarchy or an association is not something that exists in eternity, but it's something which comes to be at a historical moment for a historical group, has a time span, and this would connect conversations of things like bias or unacceptability, etc. So by calling out a node which talks about the social fact of naming, the social fact of classifying, we can get out of the problem that we have in something like CDOC-CRM, where we can only talk about the name or the concept. And we can talk about how those things have been related by social groups at social times. So we can put in an offensive term and qualify it as such, which means that we can keep the rich history of things. We could talk about things with a nuance, subtlety, and the context that we need, for example, for AI. So no longer do we have a type directly related to a linguistic appellation, but we have a type going through an appellative status for which we can now talk about the time. We can keep the modeling that tells us the warrant of who ascribed this term to this concept at what time. And we can talk, and we can then start inserting the labels or the ontological properties that are asserted between these things, which we'll reuse in making the data reusable. And then we can also start making statements on the status itself as opposed to the linguistic appellation. So we can say, oh, this status is historic, or this appellative status is still current. Again, going to things like the bias conversation. Next slide, please. And I think this is where everything coalesces. So we were pushed through the dialogue with the Getty Vocabulary Project and with others to come up with a model which was rich enough to support documenting the historical evolution of concepts, plus the provenance of how they were declared and associated in the thesaurus. And then the interesting thing is that we can then go from that richer model programmatically to a re-representation which would skip this concept and give us just the linguistic appellation, if we need to deploy this in a linked art environment, for example, and hence CDOC-CRM. But also, we can use the fact that we've associated the appropriate relationship from SCOS or potentially some future vocabulary in order to make a direct SCOS representation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And to sum it up, so I really focused, hopefully not to your detriment, on the modeling question. And so I think I'll just end on this slide by saying this is a sort of schematic representation of then the models that end up populating will end up populating the Lingo application. And it is important for having the documentation of concepts themselves, but concepts within thesauri, that's the linguistic authority document on the right. Those concepts are eventually associated to bibliography, which is that linguistic object on the left, as well as Phil's presentation said, but we didn't hear, illustrations through the digital object. And we can talk about the contributors, be they people or groups. And we can talk also about the coverage that we have of the thesauri themselves. If we could have one more slide, and I really will stop. We documented all of this in a separate documentation system so that this is a semantic model which is implemented in Lingo, but which you can read about separately and then plan matching to it or build your own thing. Next slide, please. And I think these links need to be updated, but in any case, all of this, as I'm sure Dennis would say, is an ongoing open source project where things are being developed in GitHub, and you'll find everything that's been built in the near future. Thank you very much for your attention.